You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to Tea Break Time Travel, where every month we look at a different archaeological object and take you on a journey into their past. Welcome to episode 1 of this Tea Break Time Travel. I'm your host, Matilda Ziebrecht, and today I am savouring a green peach tea, which I have to say is really, really good. A lot better than I was expecting it to be. Joining me on my tea break today is Sarah Lord from PottedHistory. Are you also a tea drinker, or are you more a coffee person?
I'm a tea, no coffee, not at all. No. But I'm just drinking very regular British bog standard tea today. Nothing too exciting.
Milk and sugar?
No sugar, but yeah, milk. Strong milk. And bit of milk.
Oh, excellent. I actually never used to drink black tea with milk. I was very much of the strong, no, we don't want milk variety. And then for some reason over Christmas, I was in a hotel or something and I had some milk in my tea and it was like, oh, this is really good, actually. Like I can see why.
A little bit. I don't like if it's overpowering, but just a little bit of milk, just perfect.
No, it's really good. It was mainly because I got into chai teas at some point. I thought they were coffee for some reason. And then someone was like, no, they're teas. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course, it's in the name. And of course, they're with milk, which I was like,
yeah.
Anyway, sorry. So yes, good. A fellow tea drinker, excellent. One of my first conversations I had with someone about this, and I said, "Oh, but do you drink tea or are you more coffee?" She was like, "Actually, I don't like hot beverages at all." I was going, "Oh, right, okay." This conversation is going to end very quickly. So, Sarah, so you are from PottedHistory. For those who are unaware, the business that makes amazing clay replicas. I have several on my shelf beside me here. So, originally, are you an archaeologist or historian or a potter?
Well, we can't really claim. We do say we do experimental archaeology, but we're not. Neither of us, my dad or I, are actually trained as archaeologists. Both would have to say potters, but we're potters with a very, very strong interest in ancient pottery, and we do a lot of research into it. And in fact, we help other people get their PhDs, but neither of us have ever done it.
It's overrated. Trust me, someone is doing it at the moment. If you don't need one, don't do it.
No, I don't think we really need one. So potter, I would have to say definitely potter first.
Okay, and what got you into history?
I mean, I joined the business after Dad did. I think all of us have got like a fascination with history. I was never interested in it that much at school because it was mainly about dates and battles. But I think once it twigged that history isn't just about dates and battles, that it's about the actual people. I've been hooked ever since. So yeah, I think always have had that core of interest. And then when Dad said he needed an apprentice, I said, yeah, I'll join. And he thought I was joking. And then I quit my job as a teacher and he realised I wasn't joking. And there was no turning back from there. So I mean, that's when really got in deep when I actually properly joined the business. But I can enthuse about history and archaeology and the things that we know and understand about people. I could just talk about it for hours. I get very excited about it.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful. From our perspective as well. It's amazing. I'm always happy when people want to talk about history and archaeology. Yeah. Well, we'll get into, I guess, that a bit later again. But seeing as you're now sort of so ingrained in history and, love your history again, if you could travel back in time to a historic period, where exactly would you go?
I don't know if it's because we're talking about Dolní Věstonice, but I think I wouldn't go anywhere too fancy. I would just want to go and see and sit with a potter. Obviously, there'd be no language barriers whatsoever. We'd be able to have a full chat.
Google Translate. No.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be fine. And I think going back and just sitting with the people and just observing what was going on just for a day would be fascinating. I would want to see them cooking and eating and just all of the normal everyday stuff that people were doing. That's what I would like to do. So just to go back in time and be with a historic potter of some description.
Oh, I can imagine.
Amazing.
That would be, I agree. I'd really love that idea of not necessarily going back for a big event or a exciting burial or anything like that, but just to see how life was lived in the past, because that is definitely something that's difficult to grasp, I guess.
And I think it would tell us a lot more, because if you understand some of the basics, some of the, just the way things were used. Because, there's so many objects and we talk about how we think they might have been used, but the truth is we're all guessing. There is research that has been done into it, but a lot of it is just kind of us seeing the information, the small amount of information we have, and then kind of making up a reasonable conclusion from that. But to just be able to see and actually see things being used, I reckon the amount of information you could get within 24 hours of just watching would be mind-blowing.
Yes, exactly. Although also part of it would be to me, part of the fascination of archaeology is the fact that we will never know. So you're taking away that mystery. So I guess on the one hand, it would be amazing, but on the other hand, imagine if, it's completely, boring or I think wrong,
Yeah, if it was boring, that was terrible. You'd be like, oh, nothing.
Not writing this up. Yes, I always say to people, archaeology is just like a detective story, apart from the last 10 pages have been ripped out of the book, so you never find out what actually happened.
But I think that is what makes it exciting, because we make things and we theorize about what it's used for, and then somebody does some research or publishes some research or whatever it is, and suddenly we're like, oh, okay, so we sort of have to rethink. So from that point of view, it is really exciting. You can never stop learning and discovering, which I think is pretty wonderful about archaeology. I mean, obviously there is a frustrating element of sometimes not knowing.
Very true, very true. But indeed, it's also almost a bit encouraging, because then you're going, well, it might not be the right answer, but no one could prove I'm wrong. Well, obviously it has to be based on evidence. For those people listening in, you can't just make up things about the past. It has to be based on physical evidence, which is what we're talking about. So, well, thank you very much, Sarah, for joining my tea break today. And before we look at today's object, we shall indeed do a journey back in time, specifically to 29,000 years ago, to the site of, now I say Dolní Věstonice because I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly. How do you say it?
Dolní Věstonice, but I don't know.
That sounds better. So the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, although obviously at this time, who knows what they actually called this location, this part of the world. The night is starting to draw in, so a fire has been lit in the center of the campsite, the flickering flames lighting up the faces of all those people gathered around to share the warmth. It's been a very busy day, but now is the time for pause and reflection. One set of hands is busy, though, molding together lumps of clay gathered from nearby, working and smoothing to create head, legs, hips, breasts. The figure, finalized, is held up to the light for inspection. One of the small children gathered around holds out a curious hand, and the figurine is passed over. Later, unfortunately, it is broken, so left in the fireplace, a memory of the peace of dusk in the whirlwind of life. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. The Venus of Dolní Věstonice. The Venus of Dolní Věstonice. The nice thing is they probably also wouldn't have called it that, so, it's fine. And so we'll get into the details soon. But first of all, I always like to look at what the most asked questions on the internet are about this object using good old Google search. By putting in Venus of Dolní Věstonice, actually there weren't that many results that came up for this one. I guess she's not quite as well known maybe as some of the other Venus figurines. But the first one that came up is, why is the Venus of Dolní Věstonice important?
She is one of the oldest ceramic objects. So she dates back to the Ice Age, so the end of the Ice Age. And so you're talking about 26,000 BC. And she is about 4,000 years before before ceramic vessels. So we're talking pots. She's just an example of the first use of clay being formed into an object. And then they chose to make her, alongside other items, she was found with animals and also little male figures as well. Mm-hmm. She shows what people were doing when they first discovered the use of clay, which is fascinating. And it's this early art. The people who were making her were Denisovians as well. So we're not talking about modern humans. We're talking about ancient human people and the use that they found for clay. So she's vital, I think. I can't, it's the idea of art is so important to us nowadays. It's in everything. Even people who claim not to partake in art still have opinions on the things that they see around them. I don't think any of us can be completely devoid of having art within our lives. And she is one of the earliest examples of art. She's amazing.
Yeah, which I guess answers the next question, which is what was the Venus of Dolní Věstonice used for? So your opinion, and I think one of probably the most popular opinion is indeed it was a figurine, an art form, just for the sake of art, or do you think she had I hate the term ritual, but obviously it has to be brought in when you talk about figurines.
It is a difficult one. I mean, I was brought up in Southern Africa, so the little animal figures that came with her were there are similar ones made in a very similar way where I was brought up in Lesotho, and the children would play with them. So, they would have that, like a lot of these children would end up perhaps being herd boys later in life. So when they played with the cattle, they were almost playing out their future role, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it is possible that it was ritualistic, but I think there is also an argument for it being maybe, I don't know if all of them were, because like I say, she was found with a number of objects, but there could be a use potentially as toys. I mean, I'm not sure, but certainly, girls and boys nowadays, but there does seem to be a natural inclination often with girls and dolls.
As much as we would try to force it away from them.
I've got a son and he does have a baby doll, but he just isn't as interested as he is with the knives and the bows and the arrows. And we've got them both. And there does seem to be an inclination towards it. It is possible. But then also in Lesotho, that there were ritualistic dolls. So we have got a ritualistic thing. And I'm comparing this because if you think... I know we think we're all so unique, but I've seen similar sort of items or similar sort of concepts used in other countries. And I think it's important to look worldwide at what people come up with to help us understand the past, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely.
And certainly in Lesotho, they have these dolls that a woman would, or a young woman would have when she is getting married. And this doll, which is made out of beads, is hung on her skirt, and it's kept there until she becomes pregnant. Once she becomes pregnant, the doll is broken down and then made into a grass skirt. So the doll, it's like a wish, it's like a hope that it hangs there as, I suppose, a talisman for the hope of a child. So you do wonder, perhaps these were used as talisman, and there were a lot of broken ones. They could have been broken in the firing, but they could also be that idea that once it's fulfilled its usefulness, you've got a baby, it's then broken. So I think as we were talking about before, there's so many possibilities. If you start looking around and start thinking about it, there are so many kind of possibilities that we will never know what she was used for. But I find the theories very fascinating. Does that make
definitely.
sense? Yeah.
And also this idea, indeed, that it's just so long ago. I mean, the amount of time is just almost impossible to fathom, really. And like you mentioned, that she was around even before 4,000 years before the first kind of pots were being made, which, we think, oh yeah, it was a while ago. But if you think, no, it was even... Yeah. It's so hard
as I understand it, the chemical analysis at the kiln site, that they were using mammoth bone as a fuel. Yeah. So when you just that the mammoths just seem... mammoths almost seem like dinosaurs. You know what I mean? I know there's a lot further back, but they just seem so old that it's really quite hard to get your head around that she is that old. Mammoths, we're talking about mammoth hunters here.
It's incredible. And indeed, like you say, it's sort of, I think it's definitely essential that we look in all around the world, really, because the fact that it was so long ago, so unrelated to maybe any modern human cultures. But so in that case, and you can really get inspiration from anywhere, because it's not like we have to look at Czech culture in order to understand who was there 29,000 years ago.
No, and I think this is it. I think it's just looking at all of the possibilities and considering them carefully. I have heard some crazy ones. There was one theory, and I can't remember, it was a book I was reading recently, and they reckoned that her arms are actually wings, and that she's a bird goddess or something. There are some theories that I reckon we can probably do without, but
how did they?
I don't know. I don't know. But yeah. So it is very interesting to kind of to listen to all the theories, but you can definitely get carried away, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yes. No, I think with all things, I suppose archaeologically, it's one of my favourite things are these kind of mystery objects, like the Scottish carved stone balls and the Roman dodecahedra and everything. And it's always fun to have discussions with people, but then at the end of the day, everyone's just going, well, we'll never know.
Who knows?
Who knows? And it's a nice I find it very satisfying to be able to
satisfying. And we, in amongst all of that, maybe we got it right. In amongst all of the theories, maybe we got it right. The carved stone balls are one of the things that I find also particularly fascinating as well.
Yes. That is the one thing, if I would travel back in time, I think I'd go back to
find out
the carved stone ball maker and just be like, so why? What is this? Yes, thank you very much for enlightening us. We know, well... I would like to say we know a little bit more about the Venus of Dolní Věstonice, but we don't. I guess that's the point we're making. I think we should mention it because we've been using the term, or I've been using the term anyway, Venus so far. But for example, on your website, and I've seen in a lot of other places as well, these figurines are not referred to as Venuses, but just as women. So what's the kind of discussion around that?
I think there's a number of things. I mean, the first off being that Venus was a Roman goddess who definitely didn't exist when these statues were being made.
Or did she?
Well, yes, I suppose it depends on your belief. I don't believe she existed.
Fair. Okay, good.
I think she was created by people a lot later on. So it's very confusing. It can make the history feel a little bit blurry. But the other thing is that the use of the term Venus, it was almost sometimes used ironically. I think when the Willendorf was found, she was named Venus, but she was also called grotesque. So it feels like they're kind of like almost, like it's an ironic term that she isn't really. And I don't think that's fair because she's beautiful, as is the Dolní Věstonice. They're both beautiful in their own right. And so I don't think we want to stick with anything that has that kind of negative connotations. It also has a connection with Sarah Bartman, who was in the 19th century. She was put on display essentially in London and like traipsed around London, and she was called the Hottentot Venus. And all of these kind of connections, it just feels a bit grubby and a bit unpleasant. And she had a really miserable time because they essentially took away her humanity, and she was no longer a woman, she was a Venus. And if she was a Venus, she didn't have feelings, and it becomes quite objectified. And I think that can be a problem. And unfortunately, even after her death, Sarah's body was put on display. So again, we've just stripped all of the humanity out of it by claiming them to be a Venus, not a human. Does that make
Yes.
I
think that makes sense.
So I think that there's been a change. There's been a preference for people not to call them Venuses, to kind of give them back their human form, give them back their womanhood, and say it's okay to celebrate the female form as a female form, not as a deity or something other.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And although there is also that extra... I mean, we don't have to go into too much detail with this. We'll talk about the clay in a sec. But I'm just curious what your opinion is in terms of this assumption that the Venus figurines, or the women figurines, represent kind of mother goddesses, fertility symbols, that kind of thing, rather than indeed individual women.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is it, because we don't understand. We don't know who they represented. I mean, certainly when you look at both of them and I'm holding a replica of the Dolní Věstonice here, there's a clear understanding of how the flesh kind of hangs on a body. You've got the sort of the ripples at the back, at her back. You've got the pendular breasts. You've got a stomach that looks like she may have had a baby, so it's sort of sagging slightly. To me, the person who made this, they've seen a woman like this. They haven't imagined it. They haven't created it as some kind of mythical thing. So I feel like it must have been modelled on a woman or women that were seen within the community. Whether after they'd modelled it, it became something else. Again, we just will never know.
I also happen to have a very nice figurine that I bought from a certain shop, which in my hands right now. And indeed, I really like the idea of, especially when I was pregnant, I was sort of looking at them going, yeah, I could imagine if I didn't have any mirror and I just was looking down at myself, then this is also what I would see. I think and
you can see those breasts. Obviously, there's no support there, like that bras hadn't clearly been invented. So you end up with these very kind of pendular breasts, and you can imagine this isn't a young woman. This is somebody who's lived, probably given birth, maybe more than once. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really like. That's my favorite theory personally. Yeah. Although what I really love about this particular Venus or woman, was that there was analysis done at some point which found a what they think was a child's fingerprint on the back, which I love that idea of potentially, and someone suggested, maybe it was actually children could have made these as well. Do you think that's a possibility?
It is possible. If I remember correctly, the fingerprint is on the bottom, and I have an 8-year-old son, and if I have these lying out, he is guaranteed to come and poke one of them in the bum. So it's kind of like, for me, that's what it conjures up. George comes into the workshop and he's kind of present sometimes, and they're telling, don't touch that, stop that, don't do that. And that's my imagining of it, is that they've made this thing, they've set it out to dry, and a curious finger's gone and just had a little prod. But again, it's that kind of that lovely idea that we can come up with our own sort of stories. But I mean, I don't think it's impossible that children made that. We've had children come into the workshop, and in fact, my son, he's very capable at making things. So I think if you had a child in training and they practiced, I don't see why a younger person couldn't have made it. It is a well thought out, well designed, carefully made object, but they didn't have, iPads. And they didn't have CBeebies, so these children would have been, probably spending more time learning these sorts of skills than our children perhaps get the opportunity to do. But yeah.
I was just thinking, actually, have you made any of these with a fingerprint on the bottom?
We don't avoid. So if I see a fingerprint, I don't panic and try and get it off. We don't specifically put one on the same spot generally. Partly because we kind of, whenever we make something, we are trying to replicate it, and it does vary depending on what the requirement is. But we kind of try and make it the soul, if that makes sense. If you try and recreate something so accurately that it becomes an obsession, you almost lose what's beautiful about a handmade object, which is its imperfections. So when we make things, we kind of accept that there will be fingerprints on them. 100% there will be fingerprints on them. I'm looking at this one to see if I can find fingerprints. But whether they're in the same spot or not, we don't obsessively try to do that. Oh, in fact, I can see one on the neck of this one.
I'm trying to look and see if I have any. I don't know if I do. But I was just curious. I thought, that would be indeed very, very authentic.
I probably have at some point. I mean, to be honest, we do sometimes, don't tell Graham, but occasionally when he's making big amphora and stuff, I like to put a little fingerprint on the inside of someone, just give it a prod whilst he's not watching. But I love the idea of that, fingerprints and stuff. He's laughing at me from the background. I just love the idea of that piece of information being stored, and that one day in 1,000 years or whatever, when they are looking at objects made nowadays, that my fingerprint could be sitting there, and someone will be like, "Oh, there's a fingerprint. I wonder who the potter was."
There'll be a whole paper written on it.
Oh, amazing.
Scientific analysis, and actually, it was just you.
Nice. Yeah, just me tinkering about.
But again, that relates to what we were talking about earlier, right? Of the whole, it's just every day, and I really love that as well. When you can actually see, like in some pots, where you can see the finger marks of the potters. And my favorite thing ever was something I saw on Twitter or something of like ancient cats, and you can see on some like medieval manuscript, and then there's little cat paw prints going over the top or something, because some cats obviously stepped in the inkwell, and it's like, I love humanizes that. The past. I think.
Like Roman roof tiles with children's feet, pigs' feet, and they often tell stories, because you'll have children and pigs' feet, and you're like, either a child was being chased by a pig or a pig was being chased by a child, and you kind of, that little moment is just stored in time for us to kind of wonder about. I think it's fascinating. fascinating.
And again, probably was just a, unimportant moment, but it's something that just, I think it makes it more relatable, right? Like it makes the past something that we can relate to, which I love anyway, personally.
That's what I love the most, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about how these were really beautifully crafted, obviously, objects. I mean, so these are indeed, you mentioned that she is one of the earliest clay objects that you have, or that we have as humanity. Yeah. How easy would it have been to make them? I mean, what sort of knowledge, because I'm thinking of sort of firing processes and all of this kind of thing. I mean, what would there have been actually clay objects being made a lot longer before, or do you think it was?
Well, we don't know for sure. And one of the things that, unfortunately, about prehistoric pottery is how low fired it is. So you want your ceramics, if you want it to become ceramics, you've got to fire it over 550 degrees. At that point, the chemical reaction and the crystallizing of the material means that you've got something that technically is ceramic. To get it really, to get it like really strong, you want to go much higher. 800 degrees is probably about what they were getting, which means you end up with something that's relatively fragile. And I think most people have had a ceramic pot in their garden or a ceramic ornament in their garden, and it gets the frost into it and it cracks and it crumbles apart.
I had that with my bay tree pot last year.
Yeah, I know, and it's really, really annoying. But once the water's got into those cracks, I mean, there's nothing that you can do about it. So it's hard to say whether she is the earliest one or that these are the earliest objects, because there could have been earlier things that just disintegrated. We did an experiment with a large vessel, and we've got one in the yard at the minute, where we leave it out for the elements to do with what they will. And we found that within about 2 years, a large urn it was, you couldn't see it anymore. It just disintegrated into nothingness. A combination of being cracked by the frost, then insects move into it, and then once the insects have moved into it, the birds get interested in it and they start flinging it round to get the insects out, and it just slowly gets broken smaller and smaller. So it's possible that there were a lot more. I mean, maybe everyone was making these. Maybe there was a mass industry. It's hard to know. But they just weren't surviving because they are so low fired. So it's hard to say if everyone was doing them. But in terms of skill, she took skill. The animals were more crudely kind of pinched together, but she would have taken quite a bit of skill to model and to carefully get into shape. And I'm guessing they probably will have had bone tools. We use quite a lot of bone tools. And then you would need a fire. I mean, it's not that much of a startup kit. I mean, most people could go into their garden, dig up some clay and make themselves a pot. I think we are blessed with clay in this country. Although if you're a gardener, you wouldn't say blessed.
I was about to say, my husband definitely wouldn't agree with that.
We are cursed with clay in this country. But yeah, so it doesn't take much. I think I've rambled. Now I'm trying to decide whether I've even answered the question, to be honest.
No, I think so. No, but it's fascinating. It's this idea of, because I mean, we think of, or at least I think of, I have to say, as someone who's tried to make their own things and sometimes succeeded, but especially when you're a child, you just want it to be simple and you just want to make a clay thing and maybe you put it in the oven, like that Fimo clay stuff. And it's so easy, but then actual proper ceramics and pottery, it takes a lot longer. And so the idea of how people got there, I mean, how do you think they discovered that?
Well, and at Dolní Věstonice, where they were making it, they'd actually dug a hearth into a clay bank. So if you think about, cooking, it is easier done if you can do it so you don't have to crouch down. So it is perfectly possible that these people saw this soil that holds its shape really well and thought, I'm going to dig myself a hearth into that. So then once you've placed your hearth there and you've cooked in it, you're going to get flakes of ceramic coming up because the heat from your fire, even if you're just cooking, is going to fire into clay. And then what it takes, and this is the most beautiful thing, I think, in humans, and you see it in children, you see it in people, even if they're not rediscovering something new, but it's that taking that spark of understanding, this happens when I do this. Well, then from there, I can then take it and I can do this. And it's the way that our brains work. We can take a concept and then transform it and make it into something that benefits us or suits what we want to do. So I can't be sure that's how it was discovered, but it seems likely to me that that somebody made a fire to cook with, to heat their home, whatever, and noticed the clay being transformed into ceramic. Then digging it up and doing stuff with it would be my guess.
And because I guess it still changes a lot over time. So you have that sort of maybe the first use of clay where you're just using the raw clay, but I'm trying to desperately remember my experimental archaeology classes at uni, and I vaguely remember in pottery course there was something about the inclusions in the clay, and you use other things to make it different.
Yeah. I mean, you can actually dig clay, because when the Dolní Věstonice was made, it was the end of the Ice Age, and a lot of the clay was created by the ice shifting, and so you end up with the ground down particles that make up the clay. And we're at the end of the Ice Age, which means that soil hadn't really covered up the clay a great deal. And because of that, you would have had quick and easy access. These people would have had fairly quick, easy access to the clay layers, and it's unlikely that it had too much nasty inclusions in it. But in all honesty, one of the things we spend most of our time doing in the workshop, because we can't process all of our clay, it's just not time, we just can't do it. There isn't the time in the day. That would take us the longest making the pots. So what we actually do is we buy clay. I mean, it's all natural, so it's dug somewhere else, and then we spend a lot of time putting things back into it, putting grit back into it. So the grit is quite useful. The grit can help to keep the object from exploding in the firing and keep it a bit more stable. So I don't think, unless it's a big pebble, I don't think that they would have really had to do a great deal in terms of processing the clay. I think they probably would have dug it, got rid of your major stones, but you probably could use it quite instantly, to be honest. Yeah.
And how much does the use of kind of clay, as in the material itself, vary over time? So, I mean, you have this initial quite simple, I suppose, then method of clay creation or clay object creation. And presumably, at what point does it kind of start taking off and getting a bit more industrialized?
I mean, it's difficult to say, because the number of sherds found at this site, they reckon there must have been around 700 animals, I think.
Oh, wow.
And there were 77 figures in total. So when you're talking about mass production, actually, it's possible that the ones that were found were just the wasters, and the wasters mean the ones that broke in the firing. And it's perfectly possible, because geographically, I'll have to check this, but this site was situated in a sort of a logical kind of trade route, if that makes sense. It kind of was within a corridor, and I'd have to look that up. So it is very possible that people migrating from one area to the other were actually passing through there, and that these people were providing figurines for them, because it's just such a large proportion. And I think Graham did the maths, and it's something like, if you reckon that 20%, the number found, the 700, only represents a 20% loss rate. And a 20% loss rate is actually a very, very high loss rate. So if we assume a very high loss rate, we would be looking at a total production of 3,500 figures.
Wow.
That's less than 5 figures per day for a year. And we could definitely, I could definitely bang out more than, did I say 5 figures? 10 figures per day for a year would give you that number. I mean, I'm not saying it is definitely a mass production site. I'm just saying that there was a lot of figures there. So when we talk about mass production, that I don't think we can fully discount that at this particular site. But I mean, the Romans probably really started your absolute mass production. They started getting into molds. And then once you've got a potter's wheel, when the potter's wheel comes in, you can bash out pots a lot quicker than you can just doing it by hand. And I think that probably is when we can really say mass production properly started. In terms of what I find quite interesting, and Graham and I were talking about this the other day, is in terms of ceramics, building and making things, there's a number of kind of ways you can do it. So you can pinch it, you can coil it, you can make slabs and create pots. But predominantly, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, and I'm not saying all pots, but predominantly all pots are made round. We have the capacity to make them square, but if you look at prehistoric pottery, predominantly it's all very round. And it's so interesting that pottery and clay must have been discovered in multiple places all over the world, and yet the actual physical techniques for using it and making it still remain pretty similar then as they do now. I mean, we have got other technologies that have come in, but ultimately I'm still, even if I was making a modern piece, I'm still working in a similar way to a prehistoric potter might be working, which is, amazing.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Which makes, I guess it's just one of those materials indeed that there's no... I guess you can't, obviously it does develop, and like you say, the inclusions develop over time, and I suppose the style of firing and things develop over time because you get porcelain and all of that kind of stuff, but still it's not like almost, phones where you can have suddenly this amazing new technology develop, or are there amazing innovations that happen?
There are innovations. I mean, you're getting some innovations now. You've got 3D printing, she says, spit, horrible 3D printing. No, it's useful in its own right. But you've got these things that are coming in, and it is quite fascinating that these new technologies are coming in, and they should change, and it should move on. It's just interesting that the main ways that potters work, it still kind of does pretty much remain the same. And 3D printing of ceramics is at this stage pretty niche. I would say you've probably got more people working in traditional styles than you do in that style. And we're talking about thousands of years of things pretty much staying very samey, which is fascinating. I mean, obviously we've got electronic wheels, and we do, I must admit, do some of our Roman stuff on the electric potter's wheel. But
it's still a potter's wheel. It's
still a potter's wheel, and it's not that dissimilar. The only reason really is Graham's back cannot maintain using that wheel for every day to create pots. He's very fast on it, and it is a very efficient wheel. So we've got a stick wheel that relies on momentum. We've got to consider our health and also the expectations of our customers. And if we were doing it all on a stick wheel, we would have to adjust the pricing accordingly. So it's just to do with, the way that modern life has, works basically. But as much as possible, we do things the way that they would have been done. We make them as they would have been done because they don't look right. You cannot throw a Bronze Age beaker on a potter's wheel and then disguise that. You can pretty much, but you just can't really get rid of all of that evidence. Which I was curious about that.
If we talk a bit more about potted history and the work that you are doing. So indeed, you're doing a lot of, I guess, what would be called experimental archaeology in a way then.
Yeah, we do a lot. And we, as I said earlier, we make things for people to do experiments in. We do, I said earlier, may use more modern processed clays, and then we include the correct inclusions into it because that's the way to do it. And we form them in the same way that they would be formed. We have, and we do go through the whole process. We've had people posting us clay from all over the country, and we will happily make with clay that's provided to us from a specific area of the country. It just takes a little bit longer to kind of, you've got to dry it out to be able to post it, and you've got to, and then we kind of get it all going, et cetera, and it just takes that little bit of extra time. But we can and do work as authentically as people want us to work. So it's just up to the client really as to what they need.
I mean, I'm a massive fan of experimental archaeology. I do a lot. Actually, it's funny when you're talking about adding in the inclusions. I remember I wanted to look at use-wear traces on a piece of ivory, and I did it, but then I was looking at it and going, it's just too clean. Like the archaeological objects have dirt in all the pores and everything. So I went out and just rubbed it in some soil for a bit and then came back in. It's like, yes, there you go. I can see them now. Yeah.
We do that with our Roman lamps and things. Once they've been used, they do just look more authentic. You've got the right burn patterns, and
my one has a nice oil stain on the top as well, because I accidentally spilt the olive oil.
Yeah, me too.
But yes, no, big fan of experimental archaeology, and I love indeed the idea that you sort of come more from the potting background, or should we say the potter's background into it. And did you find that it was, I don't know how to explain it. I mean, what's the advantages, I guess, or disadvantage of coming from that side of things rather than necessarily being an archaeologist who dabbles in pottery? You know, how is it being?
I think we all achieve when we put our skills together, and I would never ever think we could replace the work that an archaeologist could do. We have on occasions had archaeologists perhaps look down on what we do because it doesn't come with a PhD or a doctorate, and I think that can be a little bit of a disadvantage. And we're talking perhaps more old school archaeologists, and I'm certainly not going to name any names. So that can be quite difficult, is to make yourself heard. And this will surprise you. Sometimes it's harder for me to make myself heard than it is Graham to make
astound me.
I know, it's amazing. There have been the odd occasions where a question has been asked and I've answered it and had a very sniffy response. And so the same question has been put to Graham, and surprise, surprise, he gives the same example, which the person getting the answer is looking, nodding, yes.
You should just throw a Venus figurine at him.
I just roll my eyes and walk away. I just think no. But yeah, so sometimes I suppose, coming at it from a potter's point of view, there might be some people who perceive that as being somehow lesser, if that makes sense. But we are very, very lucky. We have such a wonderful community of archaeologists who we do discuss and talk with. What's really nice is they are so willing to share their information, which means that we can then do a better job, and then we can throw it back to them, and they can then use their knowledge to come together, and then we come up with the best ideas. And I think that, experimental archaeology is being studied now in universities, which is wonderful. Yes. And I think it's that hands-on practicing using things, and I talk for any skill, cooking, napping, anything, any of these skills that require a craftsman. I think getting someone who really knows what they're doing will help us all understand better how things work. And we would never ever claim to be a fine set specialist. If somebody comes to me with a bit of a sherd, I might be able to help them out. It's just not our area. So we're just much stronger as a team, I think.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I must say. I think it's, and especially because, I work a lot with artifacts. Obviously, I do artifact analysis is my main job, but I get most of my insights from those technologies that I personally have experience with, because I know how they work and I have experienced it myself. And I think that's a pretty essential point.
And I think it is, and it is wonderful. And that's why it's nice to get to be able to talk to you and talk to other people, because there's just points of view that where you see through your eyes the whole time, and you can't see through someone else's. So to have them kind of throw something into your viewpoint and go, oh God, yeah. And it just opens up the conversation and makes it far more worthwhile.
Like the Venus figurines being birds. I think that's a very worthwhile conclusion to make. Sorry, I shouldn't comment on that too much. But so in terms of potted history, then you already mentioned briefly. So it was Graham, your father, who started it, and that's how it kind of came about. Was it always historic pottery that was being used?
No, when we were in Southern Africa, we ran. I was a child, but Dad and Mum ran a pottery where they made dinner services and things like that. Oh, wow. But when they came back to the UK, Dad's always had a strong interest in history, and somebody had asked him if he thought he might be able to replicate something. Knowing he was a potter, it was like, oh, I know you're a potter, so maybe you can do this. So he had a go and he really enjoyed it. And then it just kind of went from there. And because he's so passionate about history, he put a lot of effort into it. And I think he just gained a name for it. And it's gone from there. And rarely now do we make anything other than historic items. Occasionally we will. I think occasionally just almost like a holiday. You just need to do something else. But it's usually just that. It's a planter for the garden or something small. We don't tend to... We just, it changed completely. So we went from dinner services and that, mass producing those sorts of things, to something quite different. But I think he's happier, much happier doing this.
Of course, always. When you're doing anything archaeological or historical, it's always got to be better.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And I'm curious as to the kind of process of creating the objects. Do you study the archaeological objects? Do you study analyses of the objects?
We try and get as much information as we can possibly get. So given the opportunity, we will go and handle the object. That's not always possible, but we have been let into the British Museum sometimes to handle things. It's very exciting going into that room. You get to kind of touch things and look at things, obviously in a very controlled environment. With
break things and say, I just want to see what the inclusions are.
So given the chance, yes, we will go as deep into it as we possibly can. But sometimes it is a case of images or whatever information we can get. We do have a massive library that is growing. And we look into that all the time for items. And we want to research and make absolutely sure that we know as much about an object as we can possibly know about it. So a lot of research does go into each item.
Yeah, very good. And what's your favourite object to make?
That's a really tough one. I think I quite like doing the modelling things. So I like to do statues. So if there's anything like that, it tends to be me. So I really do enjoy making the goddesses. I've made a Dionysus statue, that sort of thing. And it's really good because Dad does not like doing that so much. So we sort of have this natural balance where that's what I like to do. So anything like that. And prehistoric, Bronze Age, all of those things. See, I just love it all.
Which is good. It's very good that you like what you do. It makes it easy. And it's nice indeed that you have that kind of team. I wonder whether that happened in the past as well, right? Like whether, one of the people in the village really liked making the beakers and the other one really liked making the figures.
Well, I think it must have done. And it was never really discussed. It was just kind of, I enjoyed doing it and Dad clearly didn't. And so, but if we get a request in, it just naturally falls to me. That there's not really a discussion about it because he's not that interested. But I reckon there must have been. You do see sometimes, particularly in oil lamps and things, styles that you think, and you think that looks like that could have been done by the same sort of person. And I suspect that is it. That if you were good at it, you would be set to do that, so that someone else could be set to do something else, and do the best. Do it the best.
And I suppose indeed, if you're enjoying it, then you usually are better at it, right? Because
I think that's it. Yeah,
it's such a job. And what would you say is the most popular object that you sell at Potted History?
The woman of Windorf, she is really popular.
Very good.
Yeah, she's a very popular. I mean, I love her. I have one at home, and I'm not a particularly spiritual kind of a person, but there's something about the weight of her. And I also quite like to hold her in my hand sometimes and think about the other ones that are around the world, and we have sent them worldwide. And sorry, I got distracted because I was thinking we recently sent a parcel to Svalbard. Wow. Like amazing, Father Christmas in Svalbard. But literally things are like spread all over the world, and I like to hold her in my hand and think about where the other ones are. Like she's sort of part of this amazing tribe. So, but like I said, I'm not particularly spiritual necessarily, but there's something quite powerful about that. So I can understand why she's popular. And the Stonehenge Cup. People are mad for it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I haven't got one of them yet. I'm saving up. I'm trying to. I think I have to do another a video on them, right? So it's work expense. I'll have to buy one. And I'm curious, so you mentioned before that you've done kind of workshops with kids and those sort of things. So you make the replicas, you do some workshops. What other things are on
we do. So we're building up our YouTube channel where we do chat about things like the Stonehenge Cup and theories. We do understand that they're theories, and we do sort of try and help people understand how the objects were used. In terms of the Roman things, that's easy. So today, in fact, I'm probably going to be tasting it later. I've been cooking in a clubanis and recording doing it. And the reason
saw the pictures.
I know it's actually
looks
really
so good.
so good. But that helps people if they want to buy one to be able to understand how to use it, because you can't quite cook with them in the same way as you would cook with a thing in the oven. We're used to just shoving a thing into a really hot oven. But with these pots, you can't really just fling them onto a fire because they'll get shocked. So the point of the YouTube channel is to think about how things were used, and also help people who might be wanting to use them effectively and safely, and etc., etc. So it's a big old mine of information and pottery joy is what it is.
Perfect. Oh yes, and I'll make sure to put the link in the show notes, because it sounds it sounds really good. And is there anything else exciting coming up in the future for Potted History?
There is. Sometimes I have to do a quick little log and make sure, is there anything I'm not allowed to mention?
Right. True. Yes.
Yeah. What is it?
The top secret Venus of Willendorf world domination.
On occasions we've had to sign confidentiality disclosure thingy-majiggy. So on occasions you have to go, am I allowed to mention that? I don't know if you call that. So there's something with Stonehenge, an exciting project about the Neolithic from around the world. It's an exciting sort of Stonehenge Neolithic collaboration kind of thing going on. So that is very exciting. And then this weekend we've got another kiln firing at Vindolanda, because we have our replica kiln at Vindolanda. Mm-hmm. So the items that get fired there authentically, so they've been made authentically, and then they get fired authentically, and then they end up on the authentic online shop.
Full authenticity throughout the whole process. I may buy them with my authentic money. Great. Well, I think that marks the end of our tea break. Should probably, it sounds like you have a lot to do. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah. It was really nice to chat with you.
Thank you. It was really nice to be here.
Yeah, good. And if anyone wants to find out more about Sarah's work or the Potted History's work, and about clay objects from human history and prehistory, and of course the YouTube channel, do check the show notes on the podcast homepage, and make sure to visit the Potted History website to pick up some wonderful little replicas. I hope that everyone enjoyed our journey today, and see you next month for another episode of Tea Break Time Travel. I hope that you enjoyed our journey today. If you did, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll see you next month for another episode of Tea Break Time Travel.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.